Oh,
Right, guys, can you all see the
There you
screen?
go. Okay.
Can you see the
Yes.
screen? Okay, excellent. So Lorna, you wanted to get together to have this discussion. So over to you, ma'am.
Okay, so one of the discussions that we had when we had the one of your previous meetings, we discussed the opportunity that manufacturers can get some funding from DTI for an export council. So we have had meetings with DTI some time ago to try and establish an export council, and they actually said to us it's not a great idea because there's lots of hoops to jump through, and so they completely discouraged us. So at this point in time, we are registered as a joint action group, a JAG, with the DTI. So we still have the benefits of going over overseas with groups of jewelers to exhibit at international shows, but we don't receive any funding from DTI.
All right, so my recommendation is this, that even though they recommended against you becoming an export council, there are a whole series of benefits being a registered export council, specifically that they would take you into the European Union, the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, into ASEA, essentially that they would become a partner with your export council in establishing a global platform to you or for you. As a JAG, you have the opportunity anywhere of benefiting from the EMEA program, which is the program that they would be funding you under when they take you to trade shows and things like that. But they have a whole series of development and other opportunities that obviously in not making you an export council, they're not prepared to make available to you. And I think critically important, we need to find out from them why. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if they tell you you can't be an export council, they must give you a reason for that. It might very well be that there is a SADC, South African Developing Community, or a NEPAD, which essentially is the equivalent of the European Union, but for Africa, agreement that South Africa will not establish itself or establish jewelry on an export council basis to give other African countries the opportunity to do just that, and not to have South Africa compete with it. But that would be an unfair agreement, although it is the kind of agreement that DTI have previously entered into for the textile sector and a number of other sectors as well. They see that as the obligation that South Africa has to the rest of Africa to help the rest of Africa establish itself around the world. But I think it's not an argument I would accept, quite frankly. And I think it's an argument we need to fight against if it is their argument. They might also have told you that they don't establish export councils any longer, which is not quite true because they have a mandate to do that. Sorry, Lorna.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a comment, and maybe Chris can back me up on this. You know, we've been taking groups of South African manufacturers to exhibits all over the world. From the UK, we've been to Italy, Belgium, and more recently to the USA, Japan, and none of our jewelers that have participated at these shows have really shown any export growth. In fact, there's very, very little export that takes place. Most of the sales that take place are small little sales that take place at the jewelry shows. And when we've applied for national pavilions, so we've had a few national pavilions, and then they cancelled it just to say that the jewelry industry is too small and we're not showing any growth, and that's the reason why they don't want to have national pavilions. So maybe that's the reason why they've discouraged us to have the Export Council.
So, Lorna, my strategy would be for us to set up a meeting with DTI, to put all of our cards on the table, but equally from their point of view, to say to them that if the South Africa is the gold and diamond capital of the world, or was the gold and diamond capital of the world, for them to tell you that there is no potential manufacturing and export market from South Africa is a massive indictment of what they're not prepared to do, not our limitations in terms of our membership. And I think that that's critically important as an argument with them, that they have to take an enabling and a developing approach as far as strategy is concerned. So we want to argue for an enabling approach, and we want to argue for a development approach. We want to argue for a enterprise development approach. and also from a partially finished and raw material supply perspective, we want to argue for a supplier development approach. So each of these are schemes that they have, within their, they have a 20 billion rand supply side kitty every year that they're giving to a whole variety of industries. For them to distinguish jewelry out and say that it's not big enough or it doesn't have the potential for growth is an indictment on their side for saying that they're not prepared to recognize that we've always been a strong producer of jewelry. We've always been a strong value-added industry for gold and for diamonds and for other raw materials we mine in this country. It's just not an acceptable response from DTI. You know, when one says enabling here, for example, there are funds that they have for skills development. There are funds they have for entrepreneurial development. These are funds that they should automatically have offered to you. All right. So what I'm trying to say is,
Ivor, can I just jump in here?
Yes. Sorry, Chris.
There's just one issue here that we do need to address, though, and it's a perception issue. Because we produce gold and diamonds and platinum in South Africa, does not necessarily make us jewelry manufacturing country. You know, what happened, just a short history of what happened to the industry. In the time of isolation, pre-94, the jewelry industry produced between 14 to 16 tons of jewelry. With the reintroduction into the big world, the manufacturers of the time who were also the wholesalers of the time, started importing, and they became importing wholesalers instead of manufacturing, because it was more lucrative to actually import than to manufacture locally. So we lost more than 2 generations of manufacturing, because it was all like family businesses, which have been discouraged since. But we've lost a lot of ground to the point where we are now producing less than 1 ton of jewelry in South Africa per year. So, and that is all a result of being part of the bigger world and not having the incentives in place to keep on growing and investing. So all of those factories stopped capitalizing their factories and they just started importing. Where today, the few factories that's left, they're no longer the wholesalers or the importers. They are individual companies, which is just a rand and cent company. They're not jewelers, but jewelry is a commodity that they can make money on. They import, sell it into retail, and that is the structure that exists at the moment. So that perception that we are this country of jewelry manufacturing, we don't have a culture of manufacturing in South Africa, and that has happened. You know, East Coast closed down. We don't make railway tracks anymore. We dump the iron ore in the ships in Richards Bay, and it gets made in China, and we import it again. So that whole culture of manufacturing has deteriorated to a point where I don't know how we're going to resurrect that. And so it's very important for us to be able to not just, we can't just say, okay, now we're going to export. But there has to be a parallel process of development and capacity building again, and possibly with some forms of protection, because we don't have parity as far as that's concerned, especially with the most lucrative markets like the Chinese market, as far as tariffs are concerned.
So this is fantastic. I mean, this is everything that we need to be arguing for in a strategic meeting with DTI, or we need to at least hear from them why they're not prepared to back a strategy such as the one you've just mentioned, Chris. I mean, the bottom line is in everything you've said here, we have a reason to meet with DTI. We have a reason to ask for a development program, for an enablement fund. We have a reason to ask for tariff renegotiation with every one of their free trade agreements as well as their trade agreements. We need to get working. And the point is, it's certainly not going to happen overnight, as you quite rightly said. But if we have a 5-year strategy to establish that we push up what is currently a 1 ton from a 14 ton to a 5 ton target over a 5-year period, and we say to DTI, they're responsible for telling us how, for giving us the development aid, for creating the global markets and doing the research in the global markets for us, for giving us marketing tools to establish South African brands globally, which become known and which become sought after brands in a luxury market as well as in the maintenance market. This is what we have to argue for.
Yeah. So, ultimately, yes, that is what we do need to achieve. And, we can only do that through a program of promoting local content, which at this stage is, 80% of jewelry consumed in South Africa is imported, which was 100% pre-94. So that's the reality that we are facing at the moment. Although there's a huge amount of training being done, there's no parallel program to stimulate business for those learners that come out of the different facilities to actually be employed in the industry. So, like I say, we need a comprehensive plan to do this. The audio was a bit bad right in the beginning for me. I didn't hear what you were saying about the professional, to register as a professional body. We have gone down that route before to look at it, and what we found out at the time is that it is quite a process, and that we do lack capacity to actually run as a professional body. I don't know what your view on this is. Is it more simple than what we have ascertained?
So, Chris, look, I mean, I've set up a number of professional bodies, and obviously I was on the, on the commission that wrote the law around professional bodies. And I say that because it is as large or as small as you need it to be. So a professional body is about having a set of professional designations, having a pathway to the designations, which could be training or could be recognition of prior learning of those people who've been doing it but don't have qualifications, and a very strong assessment strategy, which is you guys assessing competency, nothing more than that. And then from a designation point of view, it's more important than the qualification is continuous professional development. So regular Jewellery Council workshops, bringing in experts from around the world in design, in manufacturing, in machinery equipment and CNC processing, etc., even 3D printing these days, and building a professional ethos on the back of a development program which starts from scratch and moves all the way through to including how you run your jewellery business, how you establish a global market, how an export council can help you establish that global market and take your product to market globally. So it's a development pathway. But let me say that as a professional body, you don't need anyone's permission. You only need SACWA's permission when you're ready to ask for SACWA's permission. And it's as fast or as slow as you want to go. You can start with 1 professional designation, or you can start with 3 professional designations. If it's 3, then it's technical, which is normally entrance level person who works in the industry. It's operational, the person who does most of the work in terms of jewelry manufacturing. And then it's professional, the person who finishes the product or who takes the product to market or takes responsibility for the manufacturing brand. And all I'm trying to say is with those 3 designations, you can take the people who are in the companies that are members of the Jewellery Council through a very simple process of putting them into one of those professional designation categories and then starting the development work with them to make sure that eventually their brands become known, their designs become known, and they get taken to market both locally and internationally. That's the development program you want in place. And it starts with you doing it for yourselves with your own membership, and then getting SACWA involved, getting the DTI involved, etc. From the Mineral Council's perspective, the Mineral Council should be your partners in this process. I mean, they should be the guys who say, you know, we'll take you under our auspices, under our wing. We'll make sure that whatever we do from a Mineral Council's professional development perspective, your professional body comes along with us. And I don't know if that discussion's happening at this moment in time.
No, it's not. Ivan, then the most important point of all of this, yes, one can put all of these structures in place, but we are not at this stage seen as an investable business. It's not a bankable business because the critical mass at this stage lies with the importing wholesalers. So for anybody to invest in local manufacturing without all of these structures in place, and this is going to take time because capacity building, like you say, if we can build in 5 years from 1 ton to 5 tons. But in the meantime, the biggest challenge for all new entrants in the business is basically finance. We operate in a interest environment different to our competitors. So even if you do have that DTI has put together before gold loans and everything through IDC, I think it was, the requirements for financial assistance is very much the same as from the bank. If you don't have collateral for 1,000 Rand, you're not going to get 1,000 Rand from the bank, and you will not get 1,000 Rand from IDC. There's no difference in the whole structure. So funding of this is the most important thing. If that cannot be addressed with a feasible pipeline financing to be able to service these markets, it's no use even starting.
All right. So
if I could perhaps come in with something here as well. Another factor that is hugely influential in the jewelry industry, particularly in the manufacturing sector, is basically policy interference. That's mostly coming from government. We're lumped in under the mining charter, and what is happening there is under the conditions of the mining charter, we've got huge restrictions that are prohibiting, or not prohibiting, but they're hampering any growth. There are no incentives for any businesses to grow because of the provisions of the mining charter. And that's something that the council has looked into, but there hasn't been any sort of result, any positive results in getting that changed. So in terms of BEE ownership or partnership.
Have you guys been at that table, Dave? What I mean is, in the mining charters, in the lead up to the charter, and as you know, the charter is not finalized yet, but in the lead up to the charter, have you been at the table? Have you put the argument for small business and small manufacturing business and jewelry business?
We've spent so much time on that, Ivor.
And what have
you our presentations?
Please, and I'd like to see the responses as well.
There's no response whatsoever. It's just a talk shop. And one reality that we do have to face, though, is one could possibly find a way to solve the issue and move away from the charter. Politically, you are not going to move away from BEE in this country.
No.
And it's actually becoming stronger and stronger. Whereas if you had to put yourself in a position at this stage of just having to adhere to the codes, you're possibly in a worse position than what we are at the moment with the charter. So this is a very, very difficult discussion to have. In what way does it stifle growth? No, you know what? I'm not going to invest in that. Where am I going to find a structure, a BE structure, to fit into this to make rands and cents? That is the bottom line here. So it is perceived that you do not want to transform. And that's the challenge. We need to find a way to circumvent the requirements and still adhere to transformation in a better way than the enforced way at the moment, where you have to have a 26% partner in your business, whether you give it away, finance it, whatever, because there's no black investors that will invest in a jewelry manufacturing concern at this stage. It's basically impossible. Like anybody that invests in the jewelry industry at this stage must be stupid now. And so, like I always say, now you have to find a person with money who's black and stupid to invest in the jewelry industry, because it's not a bankable business. So this is our challenge, but we need to be able to come up with alternatives, which we have. But under the charter, and I think it's very much so with any transformation policy,
I don't
want to listen to anything.
I don't think that anybody would have an issue adhering to BEE provisions. I think the big issue is the whole question of the old sort of dividing the pie up thing, where what the current conditions are doing is they're trying to take an existing industry that is suffering quite badly, and they're trying to chop that up and divide it up in a fashion that sort of suits BEE objectives. Instead of making a bigger pie and actually coming up with an incentive for people to say, you know what, grow the industry, grow businesses. People won't have an objection to BEE if there's something to divide. But if you're taking what already exists and dividing that into smaller and smaller bits, nobody's going to buy into that.
Dave, have you guys ever thought about establishing a manufacturing hub in one of the IDZs, or alternatively in a place like Botswana? In other words, the point I'm trying to make to you is this. Have you ever thought about the idea of moving outside of South Africa's borders, where the value add takes place and the export takes place from? When I say establish an export market, I don't necessarily mean a South African. It could be a Southern African export market, but from a place that is not affected to the extent that South Africa is affected by the negative policy that you guys are talking about.
Yeah, but that's then the case of, let's move to Mauritius and it's going to be lovely. The whole idea here is to make it work at home. We're all for that. If we want individual business models, there's many attractive ones outside. Then we must stop talking about this. We are talking about solving South Africa's problems, and we are part of it, and we want to make it work. So that option, in my view, is not feasible. It may be a very attractive business opportunity, but it does not solve our challenge. We're just walking away from something that's too onerous. So I'm very glad you said that.
I'm very glad you said that,
because I'll just close our businesses and start importing and not employ anybody and not train anybody. That's a far more feasible business. We don't have to move to Botswana.
So Chris, what you're saying,
not the idea.
So what you're then saying, Chris, is you haven't given up.
No, but we're desperate.
All right. So what we need to do is we need to have a discussion with DTI. This thing doesn't go anywhere until we talk to DTI and we'll ask them what their agenda is. Why are they purposefully trying to crash a manufacturing sector that is so ripe to grow in this country and around the world because of the brand benefit that can be established? Why are they so eager to crush it? Why are they so eager to sacrifice it to the altar of the Mining Charter Council? And if they say they're not, it's just not something that's crossed their desks, then we know that we can get them to do whatever it is we need them to do. If, on the other hand, they give us an argument, and the argument is about the SADC and the African commitments that they've made, then we know we have to look for alternative options. But if you're saying you haven't crossed that boundary yet, then we need to deal with it. If you're saying you have and you've tried and you've spent a lot of money and time and resources on it and it's got you nowhere, well, at some stage we need to do a cost-benefit analysis.
To a certain extent, we have done everything, maybe not with as much knowledge and experience behind it as you may offer, but we have done a lot. Lorna can send you so many documents and submissions that we have made to government.
To be honest, I would be more interested in seeing what the responses are and where there haven't been responses, noting where there haven't been responses. Because it's from their responses that we're able to start building arguments. If you know what I'm trying to say.
There's no response. No response. Okay?
Yeah, they tend to just ignore things.
All right, but then it's not that difficult to put them on terms. You put them on terms publicly, and they have to come back to the table. Have you had any discussions with the Chamber of Mines in this regard? Because bearing in mind that it's the Chamber of Mines that put a stop to the mining charter to begin with, has there been any engagement with the Jewellery Council from a manufacturing and a value add perspective in terms of the input that they did put to the courts to actually stop the charter from moving ahead?
Yeah, we have spoken to the Minerals Council. They're on their own mission, trying to save their own bacon. They're not that affected by the manufacturing. There's only a few of their refineries at the mines that's affected, that has bearing on our side as well. But we used to have a very good relationship with Roger Baxter. They used to be members as what was the previous organization called before Minerals Council? Chamber of Mines, yes. We had representation on our board, everything. But it was really just a case of them ticking the boxes. And also this obligation does not lie with the miner. The miner is a miner. He takes the metal out. Whatever happens with it afterwards is not his business. He gets his price. He makes his shareholders happy. And that's what it is. So there's no legal obligation for them to go further. They've always been promised brownie points by support. They have supported the industry to a large extent, but of late they've pulled back from that because they're not getting the brownie points for it. All those brownie point issues are so undefined, and they've all given up. They have their shareholders to keep happy, and you look at their business model, they have to do what they have to do. The jewelry industry is not their problem. And to go with that approach, I think you're gonna lose, because they have tried.
Have you ever thought about making an active effort to get out of the mining charter and to get out of the mining sector altogether, and to argue and to almost sue to get into the manufacturing sector instead?
We have pursued all of those possibilities, and we've taken a positive approach by trying to rather make it a workable solution within the charter, but we were totally ignored. Moving charters is not such an easy thing. We've had many people in the past advising us, "No, just do this, that's simple." Nothing is simple here. The main thing is, we need to be able to come up with an alternative transformation plan. Something that's going to promote, that needs to go hand in hand with local content and the deliverables of that, with a proper plan that, like you say, show in 5 years' time we could be up to 5 tons of production and reclaim 20% back of the local market and increase the export market by 10 or 20%. We need to do a comprehensive plan like that, and trying to get away from the charter at this stage, moving into another charter. Their requirements is 51% black ownership. It's far more onerous than what we have at the moment.
Which charter is that?
No, the DTI codes.
No. In a company that does more than 10 million Rand a year turnover, it's 26%, it's not 51%. And how you structure the 26% is everything. The triple BE, the codes generally are really not difficult to work with. The 5 elements of the codes are, again, just good, sound business practice. The idea that you have to give any part of your business away is a misnomer, because the funding is there, and only if the funding is there do you sell those 26%, and how you manage it is the secret, is the key. So it's really about understanding what triple BE means and what transformation requirements mean in the sector as a whole. The reality is the vast majority of your sector is retail. It's not manufacturing, and it's not mining. So, the vast majority of the Jewellery Council members would fall into the retail sector anyway. They don't fall into the mining sector. And if the mining sector code description includes jewellery retail, then in fact it's erroneous, it's irregular, and it's not a difficult argument to make to get it back out and to put it into where it belongs. equally from a manufacturing perspective. So I would argue that there's work to be done, but I would argue that it's not insurmountable work that needs to be done. And in the process of creating a national public argument for your members and with your members around that argument, you would get a lot of public support on the one hand, but you would also get DTI funding on the other hand, because no one wants this thing to fall apart. They cannot afford for it to fall apart. And certainly the Minerals Council, or rather the Mining Charter Council, cannot afford for the wrong kind of publicity around the idea of jewellery manufacturing and jewellery retail. So the time is right for you to start this thing rolling, and to get this change process going. The real question is, are your members behind you? So are your retail members behind you, and are your manufacturing members behind you? And are they prepared to go to the wall with the Jewellery Council in making something happen? And I'd imagine they are, because as you've said, Chris, you've tried a lot already. So you've done most of the submissions you need to be doing. You know, it's just about taking it to the next stage.
Well, yeah, we need help and advice on this. We did go down the line last year. We approached what's the legal firm?
Visa.
Who are they? Edward something.
Edward Nathan. Yeah, but they're a legal firm. They're a legal firm. They're not a.
Yes, but so our approach was to address the legality of the enforcement of the charter on the industry, because the Precious Metals Act and the charter refers to. I'm lost for words now. What's the terminology they use there at law?
It was. Have
they
regard
need to have regard to the requirements of the charter. So the Precious Metals Act does not necessarily put us in the charter. It says the charter needs to have regard, or the regulator must have regard for the charter when issuing a license. So we fall under the Precious Metals Act. We are regulated by the SADPMR. The SADPMR needs to have regard to the charter as far as issuing of licenses. So that's the point that we wanted to challenge in court, but that's kind of lost a little bit of momentum now, and we don't know if that's the right way to go.
I would.
As far as your question, do we have retail support? No, we don't. You know, retail needs an infrastructure that can supply them and finance them. So at this stage, if the wholesaler had to call in the book, 90% of retailers will close down. So it's that whole finance system through the whole pipeline that has evolved since '94 that will be difficult to change. So do we have retail support? No. Do we have manufacturing support? We have good support from manufacturing, but that's the only support we have. We don't have support from mining houses or anything like that.
It's a very exciting idea, because it's an idea almost of saying that it's something you can create from scratch in terms of a new deal for jewelry, for South African branded jewelry, for African branded jewelry. It's a great opportunity. I mean, if you look at South African International and their campaigns, the opportunity to link into those campaigns and to, quite frankly, own those pavilions, and more importantly, to establish retail operations around the world as outlets, as outlets for South African products, huge. But it's obviously not in these times. You know, we have to move through these times and put in place a strategy to get to the stage when things open up again, that we're there, and we're there with fresh branding.
All right, so where to from here?
Well, I think it's worthwhile having a proper engagement with the Department of Trade and Industry, to literally say to them, we want to know what you intend for us, because you've shut us down at every chance you've had. You've not responded to any of our proposals or our documents or our research, etc. So we want to know from you, what is it you're wanting from us? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, if you tell us you want transformation, then are you giving us a pipeline to Black industrialist funding so that we can put Black industrialists in association with Jewellery Council members, in partnership with the Jewellery Council itself, so that we can grow these businesses? Or are you saying that you're not prepared to give Black industrialists funding and it's business as usual, which is basically to ignore us? Once we have a clear answer from DTI, even if it's not an answer from DTI, then I'd imagine a public campaign to save South African jewellery manufacturing is critically important here, to get the public on side and to literally take the view that if government doesn't want to come to the party to create an industry with us, then we want to divorce ourselves from government. I'm just thinking aloud here, but I'm saying it's those kinds of campaigns that normally on the one hand get government coming to you and saying, what are you talking about? We've always been at the table with you. But on the other hand, you get the incentive and supply side funds coming to the table and saying, where have you been? We've been waiting for you to knock on our door. That's been my experience, Chris. And I know it sounds like pie in the sky, but ordinarily, one might be making an assumption about doors being closed when in fact the doors have always been open, but no one's walked through those doors. That's all I'm saying to you.
Can I just clarify something, Ava? The submissions that we made to government were to DMR, never to DTI. That's who we've been speaking to. So it hasn't been DTI at all.
Maybe that's part of the problem. I mean, ultimately, you are retailers, you're manufacturers, you are not in the business of mining raw material. And if DTI have said you've got to speak to DMR, then they're wrong. And from a PAJA perspective, which is Public Administration and Justice, you have a right to say to DTI, how did you arrive at that conclusion? How are we not part of the manufacturing sector? How are we not part of the retail sector? How did we get lumped in with minerals and resources? Because ultimately, you don't take a motor car manufacturer and put them in the steel industry or the aluminium industry. They're in their own industry. The raw materials they use, it's irrespective. It's not part of the procurement process insofar as how you define an industry. I mean, you take, for example, sorry, Chris, let me just say this as well. You take, for example, dress manufacturing, clothes manufacturing, and clothes design. It doesn't fall into anything other than its own sector. It's got its own SIC codes, which are standard industrial classification codes that the DTI uses to define an industry by. The DTI puts its funding, funnily enough, through arts, but it puts its funding into that sector as a design sector and a manufacturing sector rather than, as a cotton sector, for argument's sake, or a wool sector. And yet, for you, they've said you're the wool manufacturer or the cotton grower. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, Ivan, Lorna, we have engaged with DTI because that's how the whole gold loan came about in the days of Rob Davies. So they are fully aware of our challenges. It's not like we've never had any engagement with them.
Yes, no, we have. I was maybe just referring to the mining charter and those discussions.
But as far as business growth is concerned, the main emphasis was always the financing mechanism. And it got to a point where it was launched by Rob Davies, and but then after that, no company in South Africa met the requirements set by IDC to actually qualify for this gold loan. And it was backed with 100 million rand at the time from DTI.
And what happened to it?
No, it fell flat, and then they moved it to, is it FISA, Lorna? The smaller business thing of IDC?
No, they didn't move it there yet. No, they didn't.
Well, they were planning to.
Yes.
But then the whole thing fell flat. And
because nobody could meet the criteria of when they applied,
So it was just too difficult to actually qualify. If you could qualify for that, you would have qualified from your bank. It was so the whole thing is here is you need help over and above your own ability is what's required here as a manufacturer.
Lorna, do you still have the network with DTI, the guys who were, if you want, in your camp and pushing your agenda there enough for us to set up a meeting with?
Absolutely, yes, I do.
So then let's go see them. Let's literally just sit around the table from them and say, you know, what is it that you guys are planning for us? Because we need to get going. We want to get a manufacturing and a retail sector going. We want to be part of a global marketing campaign, quite frankly, with or without you guys.
Yes, great.
You know, once we get an answer from them, then we know where we stand. It could very well be, for example, that the Black Management Forum and DTI have entered into an agreement that the only development of jewelry will be exclusively in a level 1 Black-owned market. But we need to know where we stand because our response will then be determined by what they tell us.
Yes.
I
Okay,
mean,
so I'll get in touch with DTI and set something up.
and let's go see them.
Yeah, okay.
Let's literally just go see them and sit around the table and say, you know, this is where we stand. This is who our members, these are who our members are at this moment in time. We need to know that, number one, if we want in 2 years' time to launch an export council, are you going to partner with us in the enabling and development work necessary to get to that point or not? And if you're not, you need to give us reasons, because quite frankly, it might even lead to a whole series of state boycotts. If you're not prepared to play with us, if you're wanting to push us into a sector we don't belong in, and you're not prepared to give us government and supply side incentives that our members have in fact built for you, they've paid the tax money to contribute to and constitute of. So, you know, and you've ignored our input again and again and again. Here's the input. We've had no response from you. You've not invited us to participate in any series for innovations, for development, etc. All the EMEA funding that they're giving is funding you ordinarily can apply for on your own as a business anyway. It doesn't sound like they've gone above and beyond.
No.
Let me ask you a different question, Lorna. How is transformation in the jewelry sector? I mean, of your members, what percentage of those members would you say are 26% Black owned at this moment in time?
So the mining charter says that if your turnover is over 1 million rand or between 1 and 50 million rand, you have to comply with the 26%. And they're forcing people to do it. And as you said previously, people have become quite creative in creating whatever format, getting their staff involved so that they can try to comply with this. But it's very difficult. Chris, I don't know if you know what the percentage is of people comply.
So I'm at this stage, like Lorna said, everybody's getting very creative, but it's not based on a sound business model. It's a forced marriage that you enter into just to get your license to be operating as a non-profit organization. Because at this stage, and I'm not talking about only now COVID, the last few years leading up to COVID have been dismal as far as manufacturing is concerned. And it's really become hand to mouth, month to month, week to week type of business. Because what we also have, if I can just give you an example, I started my business 20 years ago. Gold cost 50,000 Rand a kilogram. Today, it costs 1.1 million Rand a kilogram. So just to be in the same place where you were, you know, I would have loved to have invested 50,000 Rand 20 years ago, and now I had 1.1 million. It's just not possible. Okay? So we've been on the back foot as far as that's concerned, and that's related to the deteriorating Rand over the time and all the other challenges that we've had. So there's been very little, what can one say, low-hanging fruits, easy landings, or whatever the words may be, to stimulate growth. And then you have the other side where it's so much easier just to import the jewelry sell it on. There's a market. There's obviously a growing consumer market because there are so many more economically active people in South Africa than 25 years ago. And so that market has grown significantly. And is manufacturing that attractive? Because now you've got this obligation. How many people are you training? And, you know, my view on this point is I'm a production facility. I'm not a training facility, but I am obliged to train people. And all of this comes at a cost to company where you are no longer internationally competitive because you've got so many extra burdens on your business to comply with. And in the meantime, you're trying to, you know, the international price of jewelry is set by what can be imported, what can be manufactured in the East, or many other countries for that matter, which don't have these costs to company that we have. So we are not on parity with our competitors across the world. We are really on the back foot, and we are in a far more difficult economy than they are. So with all of those challenges, you know, you ask yourself, sure, should I be manufacturing? Is this, I'm not going to find an investor in a business like this, because you can't build a business model around that in the current scenario. And when I say current, I'm talking about the last 10, 15 year scenario.
So Chris, let me play devil's advocate and say, what is it that is your priority? Is your priority the growth and the benefit and the welfare and the stabilization of the Jewellery Council membership? Or is your priority transformation? Is your priority meeting government policy? And I'm obviously playing devil's advocate because I'm saying, if your priority is transformation and meeting government policy and creating jobs and all of those things, quite divorced from the priorities of your business, because at this moment in time, you've not had the kind of response that says the one should be the other. If anything, you've been marginalized. Should your priority be transformation, or should your priority be the stabilization, the growth of your membership based on them having a value add that they can't get elsewhere? And I would argue that it's the latter. And if it is the latter, I would argue we need to be more creative and more innovative in how we create a manufacturing hub for them to possibly own, and a manufacturing hub for them to buy from, and an export hub for them to be able to take their manufactured product globally and internationally. And very often, in a case like South Africa, the answer to that is independent of government, not with government, where you meet with the kind of response you've met with to date. And again, Chris, I'm playing devil's advocate. I hear what your priorities are, because you said, you know, otherwise you might as well just, there are places you can go to and open up in different kinds of places. But I'm saying that maybe those solutions are solutions that can help you grow your members' businesses, grow your own business, and become successful employers irrespective of who you employ. And maybe that's the kind of thinking you need to start, you know, following.
Look, obviously the membership growth will happen organically if the companies individually are successful. You know, you're not going to struggle for membership if all falls into place and you are able to create export markets and you know, facilitate all of the things that we are talking about to happen and be available to businesses. The membership growth will be there. So ultimately, what's the priority for us to be able to be sustainable businesses and to make profits and to employ, and then to adhere to all the requirements as well, because we don't have a problem adhering to the requirements, and Dave alluded to that before, is none of us have a challenge to share, provided there's something to share. So that, I think, is we need to stimulate business, and I know it goes hand in hand with the whole process, but we have to short track that. Otherwise, in a year's time, there's going to be very, very few of us left.
From the sounds of it, there's virtually no one left.
Yeah. I think one of the issues that we have is most of the businesses that remain are small businesses. So you're looking at one-man businesses or very, very small businesses. So they're not going to be able to do any transformation with the resources they have. So there's got to be some mechanism in place to help them to grow their resources so that they can get bigger, so that they're able to employ and they're able to transform. Now, without those resources, they obviously can't do that. What current policy seems to be doing is it says, unless you put those things in place, we won't help you with resources.
Yes, that is current
You know,
policy.
so this is the problem I think that the industry is grappling with at the moment, where nobody's against the policy, but the policy is not helping the industry to grow. So without any growth, there's going to be no transformation. They want transformation at any cost. And most people, I mean, I don't have any figures, but I think just since the regulators started interfering quite a lot with people's businesses, a lot of people just simply said, well, you know what, I've got a one-man business. I can't have a partner. I'll just shut down. You know, so the industry has shrunk considerably because of that kind of thinking with the policymakers.
Have you guys ever thought about creating a co-op?
Which is?
Cooperative, where you pull those one-man businesses into a cooperative, and it's a cooperative that becomes the business at the end of the day. And your one-man businesses are either outlets for the co-op or manufacturers into the co-op. And the co-op itself then can become, it's either a business for profit, which means that all of those members participating are then shareholders in that co-op. So you could have, let's say, 1,000 small or independent businesses as shareholders in a cooperative, where it's the cooperative itself, because of scale, that then has the business to prove, or then has the opportunity to prove transformation. And it's the cooperative on scale that can attract government incentives and investment, very much like they've done in the farming sector, or they did, 20 years ago in the farming sector before government got involved. Because that way you protect the small businesses. The small businesses become independent contractors or suppliers into your net, or alternatively become retailers for your net, but they become associated with the net, and it becomes the South African Jewellery Cooperative, rather than 1,000 little Seraglio jewelers, if I can put it that way. Seraglio is just a name that came to mind, by the way, so forgive me for saying that. But the beauty about that then is you're in a position to go along to, for argument's sake, the manufacturing sector, and say to the manufacturing sector, we have 300 small and independent guys who do their own things. Each of them can take one learner. So collectively, it means we can take 300 learners a year into these environments, where you have an apprenticeship scheme going again, because it becomes a 3-year learnership, where each of the members in the co-op suddenly have a 12H opportunity for an 80,000 Rand tax deduction for every one of those learners they're taking into their environment. And the funding for the learnership is coming from the manufacturing sector. So the point I'm trying to make is, if you can create a cooperative kind of a culture in the sector, we're all too small to do it on our own, but collectively we can do something big here. It's the kind of thing that becomes very attractive to government because of what it means for transformation, very much like has been done with the Stokvels. Stokvel now is the largest banking system in South Africa because of numbers, even though it's, a domestic worker or a gardener who are in fact the shareholders in that Stokvel. And start thinking in those terms, which gives you something quite attractive to think about.
Yeah.
So we're sitting, as far as training is concerned, we're lumped in with the MQA, with the Mining Qualifications Authority. Their training system is obviously geared up for the mining sector.
Sure, they're not manufacturing.
Yeah, so they're not manufacturers, and I think they don't know what to do with jewelers, because we're a small fry. So they've got this splendid system in place, a learnership system, and it seems to be a dismal failure, because they're throwing a huge amount of money at it whenever they get to it. That's one of the big problems that the training providers grapple with, is the MQA is always late with their payments, so they've got to kind of fund this themselves and then hope that they get their money back from the MQA at some stage. The MQA are not interested in the outcomes of the training. They don't track any of the graduates. All their mandate is to make sure that the training happens. So the quality of the training is a box-ticking exercise, and the results of the training, that they're not interested in that. So if the training providers, for example, put through 50 graduates a year, the MQA doesn't care if they get employed or not.
So Dave,
And
so let me say this to you. It becomes the perfect opportunity for the Jewellery Council to set itself up as the professional body for jewellery manufacture and the professional body for jewellery retail, and to say, irrespective of where you've done your training, you come into a professional body designation only if you've got a qualification or you meet the RPL requirements of a qualification and X amount of experience amongst our members. Then we recognize you professionally. Essentially, we license you to be a professional jeweler, with or without the MQA, with or without SAQA. You have the ability, because you see, informal professional bodies are still legal in South Africa. There is no statutory body which is the professional body for jewellery in South Africa. And I'm saying to you, now's the opportunity to do that, where you can literally say to every single one of your members who's a jeweler, either manufacturing or retail, we want to give you a designation by measuring your professional competence now, before it becomes formal through some statutory organization the Jewellery Council has no role in. We want to do that now, and we want to say that every single person who gets trained up and receives a jewellery qualification, because we can't control those training providers, we don't accredit those training providers, we want to control the product, the person that they've produced, and say to you, only with X amount of experience in one of our member companies will we recognize your professional competence, irrespective of the fact that you've got a qualification. And that's the professional body that you can set up in the Jewellery Council now, before it's done for you and to you. You know,
is this a body that we would be able to get funding for? Because part of the issue, I went to a workshop at the SAQA offices sometime last year to kind of have another look into the whole professional body issue. And one of the kind of driving factors behind the success of a professional body, or the acceptance of a professional body by SAQA, is that they're actually resourced in terms of manpower and this type of thing to be able to do all the functions that they have to, you know, so they have to do regular checks. They've got to make sure that people are looking at qualification enhancement and this kind of thing. And all of that, I mean, you need people to be able to do that. So there's a human resources element in there. Is that a thing that would be able to be a funded thing by the DTI or
no?
Whoever?
So the funding wouldn't come from the DTI. The funding would come from a CETA. So CETA have kitties to fund the establishment of professional bodies on the basis that those professional bodies meet the needs of their members. And so it goes back to the fact that your members, I'd imagine, are all currently members of the wrong CETA. They're all members of the Mining Qualifications Authority, rather than of either the retail CETA or alternatively of the manufacturing CETA. So our first port of call would be to meet with the manufacturing CETA and separately with the retail CETA, and to negotiate with them that if we can bring all our retail jewelers over to you, and if we can bring our manufacturing jewelers over to you, will you give us funding to establish the professional body? It becomes a quid pro quo. Now remember that those small businesses, if they're not exempt from paying a skills levy, those small businesses are attractive to those CETAs just because of volume. And they might very well be prepared to make the deal, but we have to have the engagement with them.
So would it be a feasible thing to look at changing, at what process is required to change CETA?
Well, I
don't know how that works.
I would say to you, we would want to meet with both of those CETAs. We'd want to meet with the wholesale and retail CETA on the one hand, and we'd want to meet with the manufacturing CETA on the other hand. And we'd want to say to them, here's a perfect opportunity from a variety of perspectives, including new venture creation learnerships. Here is a perfect opportunity for you to say to us that if we bring our manufacturing jewelers over to you as the manufacturing CETA, and to the retail and wholesale and retail CETA, if we bring our retail jewelers over to you, you will incentivize us by funding a professional body, by giving learnership funding, by giving all the pivotal grant funding you ordinarily give to an industry to us to help us establish the industry. And then from a transformation point of view, if it's transformation you want to see taking place, fund it, because we don't have the funding for it.
And getting out of the clutches of the MQA, how would that work? Would one first approach the other CETAs?
Dave, it's simple. It's very simple. You cancel your registration with the MQA CETA as a business, and you register with the retail or the wholesale retail CETA. I'm simplifying it because obviously they'll try to stop the companies from doing it. But we also go see the MQA after we've seen the wholesale retail CETA and after we've seen the manufacturing CETA, we go see the MQA. We say to them, guys, we're quite happy to stay with you, but this is what we want from you. We want funding for our own professional body. We want commitment of funding for learnerships and everything else that's required. Otherwise, we are moving these industries because they don't belong with you in the first place.
Okay. Yeah, because
and I'm not talking hypothetically or theoretically, Dave. As you know, I mean, I was CEO of a CETA for 11 years. I was a member of the National Skills Authority. I know what the regulations are and why they are the way they are. This is all possible.
Okay, that's very, very interesting because we're I think we said it before. I mean, you've alluded to that as well. We're merely part of the mining CETA because we use their raw product or their product. If you have a look at the unit standards, there's something spectacularly ridiculous where you'll have this unit standard will be how to drill a hole in a rock face and blow up half a mountain. And then the very next one is how to do a wax injection of a ring. So we, other than the raw materials, we just don't fit at all.
Could be argued that you fit better into the Eskom CETA for energy than you do into the mining CETA. You use more energy to do your work than, in fact, you use raw material to do your work. I mean, I'm being flippant, but you understand what I'm saying?
At this stage, that's probably true anyway.
So my suggestion is this. My suggestion is we go to DTI. We have a sit down with DTI. My suggestion is we go to the wholesale and retail CETA. We have a sit down with them. We go to the retail CETA, have a sit down with them. And finally, we go to the Mining Qualifications Authority and have a sit down with them. That gives us 4 meetings where we will have a much better idea of what our strategy should be after those 4 meetings than we have currently.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Sounds like a good idea.
All right, so what's the next step? When, how? Obviously, we can't jump in the car and go see them. How do we start the engagement?
Well, the irony is that the CETAs are open for business and the DTI is open for business. So we could literally jump in the car and go and see them if they're prepared to meet with us.
Should I start with DTI first? Let me
Absolutely.
see. Maybe we can meet one of the directors at DTI and then 1 or 2 of the other directors, because they deal with the different departments. So let me see what I can do.
All right, great. All right, excellent, guys.
Did you record this meeting?
I recorded this meeting, yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. Yeah, if you could make a link available, that would be really, really handy.
Of course I would.
Awesome. Thank you, Ava.
Lovely. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very, very much.
All right, then.
Okay.
Cheerio.
Great. Thanks very, very much. Cheers. Cheers, folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Dave.
Bye. Keep well. Have a warm day.
You too. Thanks.